Hi there. Welcome back to the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's very exciting episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called The Muppet Christmas Carol.
Are you feeling particularly festive right now as we watch this movie and prepare to discuss our first Christmas movie, our first holiday movie on the podcast?
Yeah, and it's I like that we're not doing like the cop-out Die Hard a Christmas movie conversation that's been done to death. When you asked me what Christmas movie I wanted to tackle, the very first one that came to my mind was The Muppets Christmas Carol. When I think Christmas and when I think Christmas movies, like when I think the feeling of what Christmas is, I immediately every time I go to is The Muppets Christmas Carol. And that probably has to do with the time and place that I was born and growing up with this movie. This is like, to me, in my mind, this was before I'd read A Christmas Carol, like the Charles Dickens original, before I'd seen any other adaptation on the screen. I think I'd seen The Muppets Christmas Carol to me. So it's entirely possible that from my end, that nostalgia is playing a heavy hand in my interpretation of this. Could also be that it's just a phenomenal movie. But how about you, Brian? Like, what's your experience with Muppets Christmas Carol?
I was honestly shocked because, we talked last week about what should we even do a holiday movie, because we've never done one, and we've done some Halloween spooky films, which I think, we watch scary movies throughout the year. That's a bit easier, but you came back with a Muppet Christmas Carol immediately, and I was just like, yes, 100%. I think you thought I was joking until it came down to we actually have to sit down and watch this movie and do this, because I think I had forgotten about this movie. I'd watched it, like, I'm 11 years old when this movie comes out. It's huge. It's a huge film. Like, I'm big into the Muppets throughout the 80s. Like, I'm watching The Muppet Show. But quite frankly, I've never really continued on watching any Muppets content. I haven't seen really any of the movies, but you're always aware of the Muppets. They're just a part of pulp culture for us. And I think it was maybe 2017, 2018, I kind of rediscovered Muppet Christmas Carol. And it's like, oh, I forgot this movie existed. It was a great Christmas movie, I think. And I watched it as like, oh my God, that was amazing. And so now I'm watching it almost every year. And what a better opportunity to watch it again last night. I went out and grabbed the Blu-ray I scoured the city for a copy of this film. And this is good stuff. I was really excited to talk about it, because this movie, when you think about Christmas movies, I'm thinking Home Alone. Home Alone comes out at that right age, at the right time, I think probably for both of us. Yeah. That's going to be like the perennial. That's the big one for us. And of course, there's the Die Hard argument, which, doesn't have the same nostalgia factor, because we're not kids watching that movie at Christmas time. It's like, no, I'm watching Home Alone. I'm watching Muppet Christmas Carol. All the animated shows, but like the Frosty and Rudolph and stuff, those are like quintessential Christmas viewings. And of course, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation is maybe the biggest of them all, which is like the whole family gets together and watches that every year. But this Muppet Christmas Carol, don't sleep on this film. You got to watch this at Christmas time. It's great.
100%. I think some of the other Christmas films I remember growing up were some of like the even further back classics, like It's a Wonderful Life and Miracle on 34th Street. And so like that's a whole other ball of wax as well. I think that's like more of our parents' generation growing up with that. But that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer cartoon, or stop motion. It was stop motion rather. That's kind of become a classic. It's really fun to go back and watch those, not just because they're just fun little things to watch, but like as cultural artifacts, where some things, especially like in Rudolph, didn't age that well, where it's like they're going to search for Rudolph, and like his mom wants to help, and his dad's like, no, this is man's work. It's like, it's interesting. But luckily, the Muppets Christmas Carol did not have any of that. It's aged like a fine wine. For me, it's only gotten better over time, and like I'm stoked.
There's something very wholesome about the Muppets, I think, right? That like transcends time, and it's just like they're always. I don't know. I was trying to think of a way to word this where there's a certain aura about the Muppets and how we treat the Muppets. And it starts right at the beginning of this movie where the credits are rolling and you're like, okay, Michael Caine is in this movie. Kermit the Frog is playing Bob Cratchit. And you're like, It's just like they list all the Muppets like there's no performers behind the Muppets. There are, and they're all talented. Like the puppetry work is great. The voice work is awesome. But we treat them like they're people. And I'm watching a behind the scenes featurette from the Blu-ray. It's Brian Henson sitting down, and you have Gonzo and Rizzo sitting next to him, and they're doing the interview like talking to each other. It's just like you're not looking at the camera, you're looking at Gonzo because he's asking you the questions. He's the reporter here. You know what I mean? It's just like that. I don't know. There's something kind of wholesome that we're all in on it. And it's that whole Christmas magic thing, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and that's part of the fun too, is like there's this joke that we're all in on, that we're treating these characters as though they're real sentient beings, right? Like you said, like even like that meta joke of going into the credits is like, it's not, Frank Oz as this character. It's Miss Piggy as Emily Cratchit, or Kermit the Frog as Bob Cratchit, right? We're like, and that's part of the charm of it too. I know that we were talking before this about Star Trek, and I tend to be very cynical about newer media these days, but like there's something about the Muppets that just like, it speaks to me. It melts away all that cynicism, and it's just something that's really pure and joyful about this movie. And even last night I was watching this. I'll take any excuse to watch. I'm going to watch it again with my kids later on this year because we do the annual family watch together. But like, I was watching it, I'm genuinely like getting choked up watching certain scenes of like, this is actually really emotional and really poignant.
I think there's more scenes. I think it's hitting me more now as an adult of just like how significant some of this stuff is, and like the awareness of like some of the social commentary that's present from Dickens' original tale that makes its way into this movie.
No, well, that's the thing. It's you look at the original, and there's a reason it's persevered, right? A Christmas Carol is like the quintessential Christmas story. The quintessential, like, I don't know how many other 19th century novelists that we trot out at Christmas time. Like A Christmas Carol is like, that is the Christmas text. Like that's the Bible for everyone at Christmas. It's like the Christmas Carol is like that such a timeless idea of somebody, who is cold-hearted and stingy, and is given this chance to reflect on what their life means, and like individually, but also as part of a community. That idea of being like, I think there's one lyric in a song that always stuck with me, is like, if you ever want to know the measure of a man, you simply count his friends. But that idea of like, oh yeah, we're not alone in this. Like what we do has an impact on other people, and to see him come full circle, and have, even if you're not religious, as a lot of people aren't, Christmas is not necessarily like for Christians. Obviously, it has special significance, but I think Christmas has come to mean just in a broader context. It's just a time for people to come together, to think of other people before themselves, to think of the impact they have on the people around them. And I think that this movie captures that essence perfectly. It's like, oh yeah, there's something like magical about Christmas that sometimes you get caught up in with consumerism and all these other things. But then I watched the Muppets Christmas Carol, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's a time for family, and it's a time to reflect on like how I can be a better person, which is a crazy thing to think when you're just like, it's a bunch of puppets on the screen telling this humorous version of this 19th century novel. And like the whole thing is just, on paper, it sounds completely bizarre how this could have any effect on an adult human being on a cognitive or emotional level, but it is. It's so poignant, it's so touching, it's so heartwarming that like the cynic in me, like I felt better. I feel better after watching this movie. Like last night, I was like, I felt almost like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, metaphorically speaking. But yeah, just like very few movies have the power to do that, and it's still like, I'm in my mind is like, these are puppets. These are these are puppets putting on this show aimed at families, but like for children. But it's still, on the other hand, it's still so touching and still so heartwarming. It's like there are very few movies that can achieve that.
Well, I think one of the reasons, I mean, it would really appeal to the whole family as well, because it doesn't really seem to shy away from I don't know how to phrase it, but like some of the heavier subject matter, like Tiny Tim is Bob Cratchit's son, and he's like terminally ill in a way. Like he has an illness that we don't know exactly what it is, but he's got a crutch, and he's suffering, but he remains in good spirits. And eventually, Scrooge is shown like the future where he passes away. This poor child dies, and this film doesn't shy away from that. It's just like, yeah, that kid, Tiny Tim, will die. If you don't change your course of action, it's like you might have a chance of saving this kid. And it's like that. It's pretty significant. And I especially like the last visitation, the spirit of things to come, where
the Grim Reaper,
Gonzo and Rizzo the rat, and Gonzo is playing Charles Dickens as the narrator, and Rizzo is just there for like comedic relief. Love the combo. At one point, they're just like, wow, things are actually getting a little bit scary now, because it's like they're in the cemetery. They've got like the Grim Reaper as the spirit coming in. Like he's kind of ominous. And whoever's in this giant suit, like he must be 10 feet tall or something, right on set. Like it's very impressive looking.
Yeah.
And they're just like, all right, this is getting too scary for us. We're going to peace out for this last act, but it's like, we promise we'll come back. Right. And it is a pretty serious, like maybe it's 10 or 15 minutes long. I'm not sure. It doesn't last that long. But yeah, they do come back, and then the levity comes back, and it's a happy ending as per the original story. But I like that the Muppet movie here doesn't shy away from those heavier moments, and makes you realize it's like, yeah, this stuff is a part of life. And there's a quote, I wish I could have wrote it down, that I think earlier Scrooge, when he's sort of talking about like the impoverished dying, and his perspective is just like, oh yeah, well that's just that's good. It's less tax burden. It's getting rid of the surplus population. And one of the Muppets comes back later on and just like throws that in his face. It's just like, oh well, you shouldn't be that upset that Tiny Tim is going to die because he's just surplus population, right? You're like, oh my goodness. Like as a child, he may not understand some of the words and concepts of like the economics they're talking about, but you understand that when you see someone like Tiny Tim is a number and he's a figure, but you see him, he's much more than that. It's just like everybody is their own person and their own unique personality. It's just like, it really hits home there. I think it's a good lesson for everybody there.
Yeah. The whole thing about not shying away from death, like it's really, there's a strange juxtaposition when like Kermit the Frog, I mean, it's saying it now. I was laughing.
This is the thing.
Kermit the Frog, like this frog puppet comes back from burying his dead son in the cemetery, and he's having this conversation with his wife, an anthropomorphic pig, about their dead son, and it's like, this is some heavy stuff, and they don't shy away from it at all. It's like they don't shy away from Ebenezer Scrooge's death and his future, where he's in the graveyard, and like I like how they worked that in, where you mentioned, like, oh yeah, Gonzo and Rizzo was like, oh yeah, this is too scary. We'll meet you guys at the finale. And it's like, ostensibly, it's like, oh, it's like another comedic beat. But like, I know, like as an adult watching that, they needed to get rid of the comedy relief because they needed to focus on this and be really serious. So it works narratively. And
it's a reminder, I think, for younger audiences that this is a movie. This isn't necessarily real. Yeah. It's like, we know what's going to happen in 20 minutes. We'll be back.
To have that Grim Reaper, and then to have like the Marley brothers, were like, they don't mention it, but like they're like essentially they're coming up from hell. They've been sentenced to hell, an eternity of damnation, and they're coming up to try and save or give Ebenezer a warning to try and save him. But like that whole thing, like talking about the chains you forge in life, like weighing you down for all eternity.
Yeah,
like that's
heavy.
really heavy stuff for a kid, and I love that they didn't shy away from that. It goes back, I think, to this idea, like you go back to like the Grimm brothers version of fairy tales, where like, for instance, like Cinderella's sisters are cutting off their toes to be able to fit in the glass slipper, and there's something, and there's more connection to death, right? Where now you look at a lot of, for example, movies like Marvel movies and stuff, where they don't even like to show blood. It's all this like bloodless violence where everything's so sanitized and we're disconnected, where we forget that like, no, violence and death, those are parts of life as well, and to ignore them, I think, or to sanitize them, does a disservice to children instead of engaging with them in an honest, age-appropriate way on the subject matter, which I think the Muppets Christmas Carol does in an amazing way. It was like, yeah, people die, and that's part of life. Like I think Kermit the Frog has this wonderful line of like, life is made up of greetings and partings.
Yeah.
And it's like something so profound from this anthropomorphic frog puppets, but like the performance with the voice and with the puppeteers, and you get that pathos, and you're like, I'm choking up thinking about his dead son who's a puppet. It's a dead puppet, and I'm getting emotional on this. It speaks to the quality of the writing and the directing and the performances, I think.
Well, this is the thing. And I'm sitting here, I have Letterboxd up, and there's a big poster of the Muppet Christmas Carol, and you have Kermit and Miss Piggy and Tiny Tim. They're staring at me with their plastic eyeballs. And I'm just like, there's no blinking. There's nothing going on in the movie. It is 100% the puppeteers, the tiny movements. They basically have a moving mouth, and that's it, right? And it's just like they have their arms and their legs, and not even their legs for most of it. It's just they get so much through the performances, and then the voice acting is phenomenal. And I think it's kind of pertinent to maybe point out that Jim Henson, I think was he the voice of Kermit
originally? I think, wasn't he? Because he had passed by the time this movie even came out.
Well, this is the thing. So Jim Henson died in 1990.
Yeah,
and this was basically the first major Muppet production since his passing. And I think there was a lot of pressure on the voice actors, especially the ones replacing Jim, who would probably do a bunch of the puppetry work as well, to like do him like justice, like do Kermit's voice justice, and like I think it really comes through. And the whole thing. I mean, Brian Henson, Jim Henson's son, his first directorial movie, like he's directed this for the first time. And there's a cute behind the scenes thing where Michael Caine joins the movie, and halfway through he discovers that Brian Henson, this is his first movie he's directing. He's like, wow, I can't believe that. Like this guy knows what he's doing. And I think that speaks to the entire, like the company itself, the Henson company, the talent they put together. Like they know what they're doing, and they can professionally put together a movie like this so well, and then just like insert this actor into it, and he's just like blown away by it. Really.
Yeah, I don't know how the company is now, but at the time, like it really felt like almost like the impression as somebody watching from the outside, it felt like a family company, not just in the sense of telling family-friendly stories, but the sense like these are people who like enjoy working together and who are like.
That's right.
It felt like the synergies that they were able to achieve was something more than just a bunch of people going to work, right? It felt like this was like, there's a passion. This felt like passion project. Like the Muppets Christmas Carol I think you could feel the passion behind those performances, right? And it takes a lot. I don't think maybe people don't appreciate, like there's an art to puppeteering to get those emotions across that we take for granted, that you talk about, like the human face is so emotive, right? The human eyes, like you can tell so much just by what's going on in the eyes. And when you don't have that, like there's nuanced performances, the way that a head turns or the way that like a body slouches, just the way, like just little things to kind of make up for that. And somehow, like you're saying, I'm looking at these things like the plastic eyes, and I'm because of the performances, like the voice actors and the puppeteers, like I'm filling in those blanks of like, I'm projecting the pathos or the emotion onto those faces and into those eyes. And like, there's like this weird transference going on.
And they were talking about how there's some scenes with like 5 or 6 puppets, like kind of up close, like on the street.
Yeah.
And you have 5 or 6 or even more performers controlling them, but they're all kind of blind because they're covered up. And they have to act. And now it's like, it's not just a quick sketch. It's 2 or 3 minute scene and you have to act and like hit your cues and everything in this movie. And it's just like, that's the company. That is the family making this. Like they've all worked together and they're all really good at what they do. And they work so well together. And like, it really comes out on screen of how it all goes.
Especially like, we got to talk about like the musical numbers in this. Cause like the songs in this are like all 100% on point. Also bringing up, like in the Blu-ray version that we have, there's one song that's missing for sure. Like
I wanted to talk about this.
The Love Is Gone, where they're in the past, and there's a scene where a younger version of Scrooge, like Scrooge is watching his younger self break up with the love of his life. I think her name was Belle. And I remember, because like on VHS, that song was in there. I remember hearing this song before, but for some reason the Blu-ray it's cut. I don't know why it's cut. And as a kid, I hated that song because it was like, oh, this is boring love stuff. But now it's like, as an adult, that adds a whole lot of context to the movie and the scene here.
So I looked into the history of this because when I was originally looking at grabbing this movie, I'm just like, oh, what is this controversy around this missing song? And the theatrical version of this movie did not have the song in it. It was 86 minutes long. It was a 4-minute piece. And it was a Disney executive at the time, and I can't remember which one, but they're just like, kids aren't going to understand the song. It's too much for them. So we're axing it. And Brian Henson hated that they were axing it. And on home release, like on VHS, even on the DVD, the song got put back into it. And then it was taken out again. And apparently, like, the original masters and whatnot were lost of that song. And fast forward a number of years to basically now, it's rediscovered. They've remastered that part of it. It's Brian Henson, even just like a month or two ago, has said future versions of this movie will include that song. Like, we're fully bringing it back in. So it's like, the theatrical didn't have it. And to the point where they were mentioning the dates of it, and they're like December 11th, which is the day we're recording this. The movie will be available on Disney Plus with the song intact into the movie. And we're talking about watching this last night. Now on Disney Plus, you can watch the song in its remastered form as a special feature with the movie.
Is it in the movie itself, or is it like added as a special feature at the end?
There's a special feature, not on the end, but like as another like item in the menu that you can select when you select the movie. There's like a bunch of extras listed underneath the film, and you can select the song as part of those features and then watch it. So I ended up watching the Blu-ray, of course, and then going to Disney Plus to watch the song. And yeah, it's actually quite a touching song because it's kind of like it's a big breakup song, right?
Yeah.
Because she's like, oh, you're doing well. You're a partner in your firm. And like Scrooge, like, we should get married. We should buy a house, do all this stuff. And he's just like, I don't know. Profits aren't as good as they could be. And then she breaks into song. And it's just like, yeah, basically you love money more than you love me. And I'm out. You know what I mean? Like to cut the song down into something like that. But
for once, like, as the Disney exec wasn't entirely wrong, because like as a kid, that was like, I hated that part of the movie. It was like the most boring part. And like, I would always like, that's when I go to the bathroom or something. I guess you could pause it, but it was like, I just like, whatever. I don't.
And part of it is there's no Muppets in that scene. Yeah. It's literally just the two actors acting and singing. And it's just like, yeah, I could see them not wanting that in. But the pacing of the film definitely hurt a little bit. Although as an adult, I'm watching it because the scene just like kind of abruptly cuts off before the song. And it's like, I totally understand that she's leaving him, but maybe younger audiences may not understand that without the song, but maybe the song is of no interest, so they don't understand it either. Regardless, she leaves him, and he grows grumpy over the years.
Oh, that was one reason, yeah. But like all the songs in this.
Do you have a favorite song?
There's a couple. Like there's the one, every Christmas Eve in my head, I hear, after all, there's only one more sleep till Christmas.
Yeah.
Like every Christmas Eve, like that's what goes, yeah, of course. The song, I think, the opening song about every day in every way, Scrooge is getting worse. But like, and then I think the one that like the really touching one, or the one that I always look forward to is The Ghost of Christmas Present. Great costume and great puppeteering overall with that character, great performance. But then that song, it's going home and getting warm by the fire. And, you know, wherever you really find love, it feels like Christmas. Like,
really catchy.
And like that whole, like all the songs are great, but I think like probably, like that one with the Ghost of Christmas Present, that one always stands out to me. I always get like a chill. It's like, oh man, this is so like wholesome and pure. And like this, like the cynic in me just like kind of melts away with it. By this point in the movie is like all cynicism is gone. I'm a kid again. And I believing in love and hope and redemption, which I think like we need to be reminded of these things. I think for me anyway, as I've gotten older, you know, I've become more pragmatic, which is of course what a cynic would say. He would never call himself a cynic. He would call himself a pragmatist, which is how I refer to myself. But I find myself like watching stuff like this. It's like, oh yeah, like there's goodness and hope out there in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the power of this movie, but the power of art in general to really foster those kinds of positive emotions, right? Like there's a lot to be said for the power of art, but I think it isn't until you feel it yourself. It's like, oh yeah, we can change the world. Of course we can. This song, this movie, like the revolution is like, we stand up side by side, brothers and sisters around the globe, and we can do this thing. We can win together. And it's like, you get those moments, like, and those moments become, for me anyway, rarer as I become older. But like movies like this that take me back to my childhood is like, oh yeah, there is goodness in the world still, which is kind of deep and profound thing to get from the Muppets Christmas Carol. But like, I don't know, man. You take your inspiration where you can get it from, I guess.
Well, 100%. And there's no better place to get it from than the Muppets, I think, and especially this movie. It's just, it speaks volume to the original story and how they adapted it, because I'm sure they left things out and put things in, definitely. And the songs are just like on point. Every single one is a banger. I think one of my favorite songs as a kid was the Marley and Marley thing. And I like their little dance.
Marley and Marley. Ooh.
Yeah. It was spooky. It was great. It was funny. Everything worked there. And I liked that you can get those feelings and like positivity out of the movie without it feeling cheesy or anything.
Yeah.
Like it's not like just some convenient turn of character at the end. It's just, it doesn't get overly sentimental. It's just, this is a nice, quick story, and it's sincere. I think that's basically it. It's at the root of it. It's just some of the other thing I was reading about. They were talking about the ghosts and how they're all new puppets and how they tried. And this is the other thing where it's about like Kermit starring as this person, right? Yeah. And it's like, instead of trying to cast an existing Muppet character into one of the spirit roles, they're like, none of them really worked. It was almost like they're having an audition for them.
Right.
And then we're going to create brand new Muppets, brand new spirits to act as these people here. It's just like, we got to bring some outside talent for here. It just brings that whole family movie making thing full circle. I think it was really neat.
Like just about every decision with this movie, I think it was absolutely the right one. Those spirits, I think they needed to be kind of unique to that world. I don't think any of the existing characters would have had the same impact. Like that's still like that creepy child Ghost of Christmas Past. Like it's like just the way like, there's something uncanny about the way she floats.
And apparently they filmed her in a tank of water.
That's what I figured. Okay.
And it was kind of funny. As soon as they said that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's exactly what they did with in the movie 300. Like over a decade later with the Oracle. That's right. It's just like you get that kind of interesting, like slow moving, floating effect. It was really neat. And that puppet was fantastic. But
there's something slightly unsettling about that Ghost of Christmas Past, even though she looked like a child and she had this like nice like, voice, but some of the stuff, like some of what she was saying, like she was like, it was like, you were pretty harsh there. And like the effects on the Ghost of Christmas Present, where he's giant and there's a one scene where he just like shrinks down in the camera, like that looked seamless. Like that looked amazing. It looked really good. Like, I'm gonna go into the Corridor Crew YouTube channel and suggest breaking down that scene. Because some of the stuff, like, okay, when they were flying over the cities, like, yeah, you could tell like they were on a green screen or whatever, but like that scene where like that dude just shrinks down from like really giant to just only kind of giant. That was seamless. I'm sure it's probably some really simple visual trick that once it's explained is like, oh yeah, of course. You could probably do it in your parents' basement now, but like, I'm just like, there's certain effects in there. Like, oh my goodness, like how do you do that with puppets and like without digital photography, without digital like CGI back in the day, right? Like,
well, it's still fun as an adult to go and watch this and be kind of amazed at how they pulled the stuff off. Like, my mind is thinking, well, where do they stuff all the actors controlling all? Like, there's the rats who work in Scrooge's office, and I think at one point there's 7 or 8 of them. And be like, oh my god, how many people are underneath the sound stage here, and how do they coordinate this? And it was just amazing how they pull it all together. And some of the special effects are really pretty top notch. They know what they're doing.
That goes back to something I want to talk about before. That we were talking about, like the songs and the performances and all these numbers. And the directing, we're talking about Brian Hanson's a first-time director, but you look at these musical numbers. Let's look at, first of all, like that opening one where it's talking about like Ebenezer Scrooge and every day in every way Scrooge is getting worse. But it's like Scrooge is walking through the streets of London and there's all these puppets and there's so much coordination going on. There's the talking vegetables, and there's the little mouse family. It's even tougher for us Mises. But there's all these puppets doing all these amazing things, like, and it's going through like the birds on the wire, and then the cats pop out and they're singing. But like there's so many, like they could have taken the easy route and just like had like, you know, single like still shots.
Yeah.
Somebody walking across, but like they were doing complicated camera moves, doing all this complex choreography between, there was a couple live action people, but a bunch of puppets, like not just like popping up and doing their thing, but like moving across the screen to show that like to give that illusion that there was no borders, that they were sentient beings that could walk anywhere.
Right.
Like it was so many little moving parts that I think we take for granted. Like if you were to take out one of those elements, you'd notice if it weren't there, but it all works together. And not just to have like all these things happening on screen, but to have the caliber of performances, again, in terms of like not just the singing, but also the puppeteering, where you're getting across a lot of that pathos and a lot of that emotion that might otherwise get lost. Just phenomenal work when you start to think down and think about, when you start to sit down and think about the logistics of how the heck we could pull any of this off with live actors, some of it, let alone puppets, where you're saying you have to build a soundstage up so that people can get below and do the puppeteering. And also, like you're saying, sometimes you got to do the puppeteering blind, because like you're lying on your back or something, or you're crouched down and you can't see, like you take for granted, like when Kermit the Frog is saying something and Miss Piggy's reacting, like those puppets can't see each other. It's the people below the false floor or whatever who are having to like do all this rehearsal and get all this done ahead of time and really plan that out. And it translates so well on screen. It's amazing when you start to think about all these little pieces coming together.
How do you maintain eye line contact between two puppets when you can't see where you're pointing your puppets from underneath a stage? They do it. They manage to do it, and it's amazing. What do you think about Michael Caine in this role? Like, this guy is like the centerpiece actor. He's the biggest actor. He's really quite talented.
I know that in reading and watching featurettes about this, I know like he went in and he's like, the only way that I do this is I'm going to play it 100% straight. Like no winking at the camera. Like, oh, we're in a puppet world. All the human actors, they all play it 100% straight, as though it's like, oh no, this is a world. These are real characters and real people, the Muppets, that is. Like I think little moments where like his nephew Fred comes in and he's leaving the office, and Kermit the Frog just turns to him and says like, oh, Merry Christmas, Fred. And Fred just like turns around like, Merry Christmas to you, Bob. But like 100% straight. It's like that moment. Yeah. And it feels like there's a certain level of verisimilitude that you get across like that. And Michael Caine leading it off, it was amazing. He played everything 100% straight, as though he were acting against other human actors. Like my only question is like, how do you get through the day without laughing your head off at all this ridiculousness going on around you? Because like, not only is it like the setup when you're there, it's got to be, it seems ridiculous, even though the end product is amazing. Like when you're in the moment, it's like, I'm talking to a puppet rat, and like, and I'm supposed to be like emoting and getting these big, ideas across. But it worked. Like, it's amazing. It was a perfect choice. Like they played everything 100% straight, and it worked amazing. Like even all the other actors,
they all did a good job.
Did the same thing. Yeah, it was like, and that, I think that helps you get lost in the world as well. Where like, these people, like, there's no winking at the camera. There's no like, ha ha ha. They're puppets and we're humans. Like, no, it's like we're people interacting with each other, and there's humor in there as well. Like Rat's doing the hula dance there. Heat wave. When he denies them coal, is like, oh yeah, how would you like to find yourselves unemployed? And they, heat wave. There's like little moments like that. But overall, like, yeah, like Michael Caine did a phenomenal job. I can't imagine anybody else doing that role. That's when people have those like questions online, like what's a role that you can't imagine any other actor doing. Like, my first thought, Michael Caine and the Muppets.
That's it right there.
Who else could have pulled that off? Who else could you possibly imagine in that role? I don't know.
It's true. He was born for the role. He was really, really good at it. I especially liked his little happy dance there at the end with the. It's like there wasn't much choreography going on, I think, with some of the human acting, like the dancing and whatnot. So it's just like he's just pulling out this kind of stiff dance. It was really great. It really fit the character too. It was just really,
I love,
really touching.
Yeah, with the Ghost of Christmas Present doing the dance number, And all of a sudden you see like Scrooge is starting to like, oh, come loose a bit. And he's doing like that weird dance with him.
Yeah.
It's like, this feels like, it felt like, you know, this curmudgeonly old man who hadn't danced or, you know, felt joy in his heart. And he's like, and he's trying to start to like, oh, like, it's almost like literally like getting the rust out of the joints. Is like, he's starting to like move and like dance with the puppet there. And it's like little things like that seem like almost, they make it seem like a real character, like that's a human character who's not perfect. He doesn't come out and start dancing like Fred Astaire, right? It's like, and do this amazing dance. Yeah. No, he's like, he's an old man, and he's like, he's starting to learn to get that joy back into his life. It was amazing. Yeah. I don't know if like, I just noticed watching it again, like he's got a gold tooth.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Which must be just for like like a little cap that goes on. It was like, oh, like little touches like that. Like he didn't have to do that. Like who was going to notice? But I don't know whether it was him or the costume department is like, oh, hey, this is a cool little touch. It's like, oh yeah, he loves gold so much. It's like, it's part of his body. He loves money so much. Like it's part of his literal body. Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, one of the other gags that I really liked was
so many.
At the beginning of the movie, right? There's so many. And all the rats in the office are just like, oh, we're cold. We're cold. It's just like, can we at least put on one more like piece of coal? And it's just like, no, we can't put on more coal. It costs too much money to do that. And then as part of his generosity, Scrooge lines up and he's giving gifts to everyone. He gives the rats platters of coal on their desks for them to discover the next day for Christmas. It's just like, I thought that was really funny. It's like, oh, that was a long play joke for the movie that was really good. Were there any other little jokes or anything that you really enjoyed?
I love the whole back and forth between Gonzo and Rizzo the rat, where he's like talking about like Rizzo's asking like, how could you possibly, we're down here and he's up there, how could you possibly know what's going on? I was like, well, I'm the narrator. Yeah. I'm omniscient. I'm like, well, hell, Mr. Hoity Toity over here. But like there's a scene too when like they're watching from outside Ebenezer's bedchambers. And there's this really intense scene. It's not a gag. Sorry, I got away from your question. But there's this really intense scene where Gonzo's like, he's got his hands up and he's standing on the branch there. It's like, yeah, behold, when the clock strikes 1. And it's like the wind is blowing and then the light comes on, like the floodlights come on. But it's this really intense scene. It's like, it's supposed to be like over dramatic and everything.
Incredible.
But like, or Rizzo the rat, when he's on top of the fence, they're going to Ebenezer Scrooge's backyard. And he's like, yeah, he's afraid of heights, but he jumps down. But it's like, oh, I forgot my jelly beans. And he goes back and squeezes through the bars and squeezes come back. And,
and
Gonzo looks at him and he's like, what? Like, you're an idiot.
You could fit through the bars this entire time.
I loved seeing Animal show up. Animal was one of my favorite Muppets growing up. See him show up and play some drums for us, which he was.
There must have had the whole Muppet crew show up. They even had
what's the dog's name there who plays the piano? He showed up too at Fozziwig's party.
Yeah. Yeah, Fozzie, and sort of like the flashback there, not the flashback, the spirit of past, as like the company owner of Scrooge, one of Scrooge's first jobs there. It was just like, you got everyone into a good role here.
It's pretty amazing. And then in the future, when all the people are like, when they robbed Scrooge's house, there's the giant spider and like the bugs. Were those like classic Muppets or were they made for the movie? I don't know.
I mean, it was kind of weird too, because it's like, oh, what'd you get? It's like, I got this blanket and the spider takes it. It's like, it's still warm. And you're like, that's pretty morbid.
Right? It's like, that's just, they're talking about corpse heat. Like that's.
Yeah. Right. It was just like, it was really weird.
Again, not shying away from like talking about death.
And I mean, that entire scene on the street where the other businessmen are just like talking about this guy dying and it's just like, oh, they start making fun of him. And it's like, they'll only go to his funeral if there's a free lunch provided. It's just like,
I also loved, it's like as a kid, maybe didn't clue in, but all the businessmen in this world, apart from Ebenezer Scrooge, who's played by Michael Caine, all the other businessmen are pigs.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which is like that was not coincidental. They were obviously making a statement with that.
Right? Oh man. Absolutely incredible. What a Christmas treat this movie is every year.
Yeah, it is great. I watched this as a kid growing up. Through the years, I kept watching it, and then when I had kids, I started to introduce it to them. They're not as into it as I am, but I think it's maybe one of those things where, like, especially my daughter, she's full on into her teenage years now, so like nothing is really cool right now. But I'm hoping that tradition carries on, where it's like, oh, when they're adults and they'll look back and be able to share this with their kids and maybe hopefully get that same kind of inspiration from this. Those kind of special Christmas movies are few and far between. I think the only other kind of modern one I think of since then has been Elf. It's had the same kind of, it's had maybe wider reaching cultural impacts. I don't know. The Muppets Christmas Carol, I know a lot of people enjoy it, but I don't know if it's talked about as much. Like Elf seems to be like, that is like the movie of like a generation. I think we were, when did that come out? We were in our early 20s probably when that came out, I think. So it didn't have, I like that movie, but it doesn't have the same impact for me as the Muppets Christmas Carol. And I think it is that time and that place of seeing that when I was a kid, right?
Well, that plays a huge factor into it. I mean, we grew up in the 80s. The Muppet Show was probably at the top of its game during that time. It was on TV constantly.
The Muppet Babies.
Fully into the Muppet Baby cartoon series. Forgot about that. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
And I mean, that stuff definitely has a nostalgic cast that might be difficult to convey to future generations, and unless there's more Muppet stuff and people kind of get to rediscover it every few years. But this one, keep pushing it out there. It's really good.
I don't even know, what would the heir apparent to the Muppets be? Like, what's the equivalent now? Like, just good-natured, good-hearted, kind of family fun? I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you. And I didn't do any research on like what other Muppet movies there are right now. I know there are a few live action ones with like Jason Segel.
Yeah, well, I know back in the day, which I still haven't seen, and it's probably blasphemy, but Muppets Treasure Island, it's supposed to be amazing. Yeah. There was one with Ricky Gervais. He was in one. There's been a couple in like the 2000s and 2010s. Like, it's like the Muppets are still somehow floating around, making new content every couple of years. Like, it's a far cry from like the Muppet Show in the 80s when like they were, like you said, it was front and center in the cultural zeitgeist. Like, I remember on, I think it was Sunday nights or Sunday evenings, or maybe Saturdays, but we'd always sit down and watch this. It was available like on a regular basis, like that, and Looney Tunes were like go-tos for us on the weekends.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't know if current generations are as aware of the Muppets now.
Well, the other factor is just there's so much more material and content out there.
Yeah,
right? Like there's so much more competition. It's just like, especially like for kids shows and moving into the world of CG shows where they don't necessarily need to spend as much time in the animation as they would have with the hand-drawn stuff. And you're like, oh, we can pump out CG shows really quickly. And there's so many channels. There's so much money supporting it. It's easy to see a lot of those properties get buried in today's world.
It takes a lot of work to do that stuff. Like the Dark Crystal, there was a sequel series on, was it Netflix, I think? And again, it was all like live action, like puppetry, right? Like the original Dark Crystal was. But you got to think like that takes a lot of pre-planning and a lot of, coordination. There's a lot that goes into the simple, like what looks simple on screen of taking these puppets and infusing them with these lifelike qualities to the point where they foster that willing suspension of disbelief. There's a lot that goes into that. And it's probably, like you said, it's probably easier these days where there's like, oh, we'll just put together to do CG instead, right? We don't have to worry about coordinating a bunch of people on set together. We don't have to worry about puppet eye lines. Like building sound stages with false bottoms so that you can have performers on there. I think there's an art and a craft to puppetry in general that been kind of a little bit lost. I think the Muppets really brought that front and center. And it's not until, decades later now, looking back and seeing like how special that kind of content was and how much like love and attention and passion went into something like that. You can really, I think one of the reasons that the Muppet content worked, the show and the movies, is because you can't go in there, you can't be a puppeteer or a voice actor and not be passionate about what you're doing, because you have to work long hours doing all kinds of crazy setups and intense coordination, and it's long working hours. Like, you have to be really, really passionate about what you're doing, and that passion, I think, really shines through with all the content. But I think the Muppets Christmas Carol, for me, is always the kind of crown jewel in the Muppets collection.
Without a doubt. do we even need to talk about our ratings for this movie? Like, I have a feeling I know what your rating of this movie might be.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a 5-star with a heart rating. We talk about letterboxd ratings with it's a 5-star rating and then the heart for something a little bit extra special. And this checks every box. I've paid good money to feel like this. Like I bought the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
I had the VHS back in the day. The fact that something like this can bring this level of joy, or this like, just like melt away that cynicism and like make me feel young again. It's an amazing movie. I hope future generations are able to discover this. I don't know if it's going to have the same impact because part of it is being in that time and in that place maybe.
Yeah. But
I hope that it does get discovered or rediscovered by future generations. I think there's still some good stuff in there that I think there is something timeless about both the original Christmas Carol and also the Muppets version, I think.
Without a doubt.
You have a rating for us, Brian?
Oh, yeah. I kind of shocked myself in a couple previous viewings. I actually rated this as a 4.5-star film. And I'm just watching it last night. I'm just like, why would I give it 4.5 stars? This is an easy 5 stars. Yeah. This is a heart film on Letterboxd for sure. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it's wasn't fully in the Christmas spirit of that time, but I'm fully into it now. And it's like just really appreciating, I think even going beyond just the movie and checking out some of the special features and behind the scenes stuff. It was just like, I don't normally do that for a lot of movies. And I want to know more about the world these guys have created. Like, you know, idolizing Jim Henson and the world he created when I was a kid, and seeing this as a child and seeing it as an adult is just, it's really special.
Well, I think that's one of the things about the Muppets Christmas Carol is like the whole thing, like the direction and the design, the set design and the character design and the acting and the performances. I feel like I'm drawn into a world. I feel like for that, whatever it is, 87 minutes or something, 86 minutes, I feel like I'm genuinely transported in a way that few movies have the power to do into another world, but that when I come back, I bring back something of that world with me, right? That there is some of that when they talk about movie magic. This is one of the movies. That's the magic, right? That there's something magical. There's something that transcends the genre with this movie.